Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here this morning. Ms. LaValle, do you feel as if these changes in the rules are inconsequential?
Again, we have worked in cooperation with Fish and Wildlife Service, with the BLM, to manage the landscape, to manage for the benefit of the Gunnison sage grouse. Where I think the uncertainty comes in is in the actual listing. When we talk about having to look at a map to determine critical habitat without clear parameters and no specific landowner notification, that's a concern. And again, where we're talking about the adverse modification potential, I clearly appreciate that there has been no action to date. But where you have the continual litigation, it just opens the door for additional litigation, for the potential, for the adverse. Those are the concerns that we have as far as the unintended consequences.
Ms. Bud Fallon, do you feel as if these rule changes are inconsequential?
No, I think these rule changes are absolutely consequential.
You know, that's my real problem with this whole situation we have in Washington, is that this administration, supported by some members of the minority, change the rules and then call them inconsequential without realizing that it affects people on the ground. And it may not be consequential to the bureaucrats here in Washington, but it's certainly consequential to the areas where people live and work and try to make a living. So, I just think that's an odd designation. Ms. LaValle, let me ask you another question. In the next few years, if the Fish and Wildlife Service proposed to list another species in your general vicinity, what would your initial reaction be? Would you be concerned, or would you have any confidence to be able to continue to work with them and continue to do your business without drastic change?
We're already experiencing change when we continue to get the push to change what we're doing on the ground now, even though what we're doing now on the ground has yielded and exceeded the habitat guidelines. We're already getting the change. So when another species come, which species wins, which critical habitat wins, what are we supposed to manage for? And that's, to me, again, the other unintended consequence. When we talk about the science in all of this, it is very hard to meet a statistical significance in science when we actually have the reflection of the grazing that's being done on the ground now. So we have to have such broad parameters for that we often lose sight of what's actually occurring on the ground when we talk about statistical science and that.
Do you feel that the Fish and Wildlife Service is a collaborative? I mean, Mr. Thompson was talking about collaboration and things that you've mentioned that you've been doing right along. But do you feel that the Fish and Wildlife Service is a collaborative partner in this, or do you feel like it's more an adversarial relationship?
Again, we are working with them, but there are times, especially recently when we've been in meetings, where the Fish and Wildlife Service has said, when we're in meetings with BLM, our preferred alternative is no livestock grazing. That's concerning.
Ms. Bud Fallon, do you have any comments along those lines?
Obviously, I think it depends on the individual whether they're collaborative or not. Several times the sage grouse CCAA in Harney County has been mentioned, which is the one that they're counting in Oregon is such a great success story, where they talk about the bird and the herd. Those Fish and Wildlife Service people actually stated to me that they went out on a limb to do that because the habitat conservation looked at the entire habitat and the land, not just the species itself. And for that area of the Fish and Wildlife Service, that was a whole new ball game to look at. That's why the landowners support it, is because the collaboration occurred looking at the ecosystem, not just the sage grouse. But the Fish and Wildlife Service is a species-oriented agency, not an ecosystem-oriented agency, and that causes great problems to those of us that have to live with the decisions.
Let me ask Mr. Ash a follow-up to that statement. Mr. Ash, what do you say to that species-oriented versus ecosystem-oriented remark there by Ms. Bud Fallon?
Well,
And you got 9 seconds to do
Yeah,
it.
really. There is no distinction between species and the ecosystem that they live in. The Endangered Species Act says it's our responsibility to conserve the species and the ecosystems on which they depend.
All right, I'm sorry. Thank you.